Hey Scott, how's it going? This is going to be my quick little video outlining my potential Fanverse project. I hope you enjoy.
A shadowy organization of Fangame developers, aspiring creators betrayed by the very people they looked up to. Threats of leaks, and even private photos of Five Nights at Freddy's creator Scott Cawthon's wife and children. There's another side to the story of the pair though. Fanverse gatekeeping.
They tried to get Ultranite out of the Fanverse as soon as he got in.
Secret conversations with Scott Cawthon.
Kane or Phil sent an email regarding Ultranite.
Lifelong dreams shattered amidst rivers of regret. Who wrote this? To Junior's developer Ramanov, the Fazbear Fanverse initiative was the pinnacle. It was the greatest achievement that a Fangame developer could ever hope to obtain, and he wanted it more than anything. Having grown up fascinated by Five Nights at Freddy's, Ramanov dreamed of making his own FNAF game, and he hoped that perhaps one day he'd be admitted into the Fanverse himself. He learned to develop simple FNAF fan games in Scratch, and eventually taught himself ClickTeam. 4 years later, Ramanov would release Eddie and the Misfits, a rather impressive first effort from the young developer. Next, he would release Weekdays at Wilbur's, the remaster of which would go on to be played by MatPat on GT Live. Motivated by the positive reception he was getting, Ramanov quickly developed Wilbur's 2 over the span of 1 week. Despite his young age, Ramanov showed tremendous talent. These fan games hold up quite well, even by today's standards. With 3 successful fan games under his belt, Ramanov teamed up with his friend Derek, an incredibly talented artist, and together the two began work on Juniors. It was around this time that Ramanov would join Kane Carter's Buy Me a Coffee chat, or BMC, a private community in which members pay £5 a month to gain exclusive access to PopGo's evergreen content, as well as the opportunity to chat with its developers. Suddenly, Ramanov and his friends found themselves interacting with the same fan game icons that they'd looked up to for so long. It was a dream come true. Unfortunately, the collapse of this relationship is what would eventually lead to the pair, and everything that emerged as a result. With the quality of their games rapidly increasing, Ramanov and his friends started to think that perhaps they had a shot at being admitted into the prestigious Fazbear Fanverse initiative, a small group of developers handpicked by Scott Cawthon to develop licensed FNAF fan games. Kane Carter and Fiznom were both part of the Fanverse, and being in contact with them through the BMC Discord, naturally these aspiring developers reached out. At the time, neither Ramanov nor any of his friends were 18 years old yet, and that's a strict requirement for participating in the Fanverse. However, the young developers were already aware of that, and their intention was to get their current projects done whilst waiting to turn 18, and then hopefully leveraging those projects into future Fanverse positions. However, in spite of this, according to Ramanov and Meklis, they perceived Kane and Phil as sort of gatekeeping the Fanverse.
Kane Carter and Fiznom, when they say you can't get into the Fanverse, they don't know what the hell they're talking about, because it took me literally 5 seconds to email Scott to get into the Fanverse, dude.
Well, did they actually say? I don't. Have they said that?
Yeah, I mean, it was in a server.
Especially, it was like
Okay.
you can't email Scott straight up and get to the Fanverse when I know multiple people who have. It's not hard at all.
If you're saying it's so easy, where are all the other Fanverse games?
Well, then some are probably not announced. I don't know what are in it.
Oh,
and
okay,
what's
fair
not,
enough. It's okay, fair enough.
Ramanov claims that the two of them made it seem like it was virtually impossible to join the Fanverse, that you couldn't just apply, and that Scott needed to recognize your work and reach out to you.
No, it's not hard to get into the Fanverse.
It's hard for him to respond to you, but
he
the
sucks at
process is
responding,
not
dude.
what they're talking about.
I haven't seen any public Fanverse gatekeeping from any of the Fanverse participants.
Nah, it was in his Buy Me a Coffee server.
To Kane and Phil's credit, this is how it worked for the two of them, as well as everyone else included in the initial Fanverse announcement, so I understand why they believed that. Thus, you can imagine Ramanov's surprise when he got a message from Ultranite saying that he'd just emailed Five Nights at Freddy's creator Scott Cawthon, who had replied, and that he was now in the Fanverse, or at least he had a shot at getting into the Fanverse. Ramanov was stunned. They had been told that this was impossible, that you had to be selected for the Fanverse, and that there was just no way you could email Scott and apply for it. In response, Ramanov emailed Scott as well, who replied saying that there was always room for more projects in the Fanverse.
He got into it, and I was a little jealous, so I was like, maybe I can get into it. I emailed him, really nonchalant emails like, hey, can I join the Fanverse? He's like, always room for another spot. He asked me for the team, release date, and all that jazz.
Ramanov was overjoyed. Not only was Scott receptive to the idea of him producing a game for the Fanverse, but Scott was already familiar with Eddie and the Misfits. I've gotten to know Ramanov a little bit in the last couple of months, and while he can be like a trolly kind of guy, he did once tell me that those conversations with Scott meant a lot to him, and that he'd always cherished the fact that he got that opportunity, even if things didn't work out.
Wait, what
My
happened?
pitch was, I said, because so many people are asking for like $100,000 in budget. I'm like, I don't need that much money to make a game.
Yeah.
I said, I'll have the game in less than a year done for you and ready for launch. And I was like, I'll pay for it all myself.
Oh my god, so you weren't even asking him for funding.
I wasn't asking for funding. I just liked the idea of. I just liked the idea.
It was an
You
honor.
don't really
It was an
need
honor.
money.
It was an honor. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
an honor.
Unfortunately, Ramanov and his friend's relationship with the BMC crew continued to deteriorate. Ramanov confessed to me that he was quite competitive and did always compare his own games to those of the Fanverse developers, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, it does seem to me like there was a bit of a rivalry developing between the established Fanverse developers and the newcomers like Ramanov and Ultranite. The thing is, this went both ways. The following screenshot shows PopGo's developer Kane Carter comparing his own project to the likes of Junior's and Tealerland. It's pretty ridiculous how well other Fangame trailers are being edited right now. Junior's, for example, that's apparently going to pop off. We've got to stay ahead of the curve, or our position in the Fanverse will start seeming undeserved. We need to be clearly above average. Comparing the videos we've released for the game with stuff from, say, Tealerland, Junior's original location, we're definitely not at their level there. Another message shows Kane directly referencing Ultranite's game Chomper's stage, identifying it as the bar that the PopGo's Evergreen stage would need to meet. Clearly, all of these developers were competitive with each other, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. If it motivates everyone to work harder and make better games, great. I agree with Kane that as a Fanverse participant, they ought to be striving to make their game distinctly above average. The expectations for Fanverse games are higher, they're allowed to have budgets and stuff. However, according to Ramanov and Meklis, at some point, Kane and Phil uncovered evidence that years prior, Chomper's developer Ultranite, who at the time went under a different name, had allegedly failed to pay one of his artists. They also uncovered evidence that he had leaked some privileged materials back in the day. From what I can gather, these allegations are both true. However, when I asked for more context, I learned that Ultranite was like 12 years old when this stuff happened.
So he got a modeler, and he was modeling the characters. He was 12, and the sum of the amount for like all the models, let's say very expensive, and he was like, I can't pay for this or whatever.
He commissioned models that he could not afford.
Well, I don't know exactly.
I don't know if the price dropped when he. It's very.
I don't know.
According to Ramanov and Meklis, Kane Carter and Fiznom emailed Scott Cawthon and brought this information to his attention, recommending that Ultranite not be admitted into the Fazbear Fanverse as a result.
Problem was still you should have paid him, whatever, but they worked it out, and that's why when he came back, I was skeptical because I heard about this, but then it got cleared up, so I was like, okay, well.
Okay, so you spoke to the modeler who was not paid, and he said, yeah, we worked it out.
As you can imagine, Ultranite and his friends were really pissed. This had been their dream for a long time, and now there was a chance it could all go away over stupid stuff Ultranite did when he was 12 years old. They felt that Kane and Phil were simply gatekeeping the Fanverse, and that their concerns weren't really legitimate. Furthermore, the Chompers team had a lot of members on it, and if Ultranite was removed from the Fanverse, all of them would be impacted as well. Unfortunately, even if Ultranite really had grown since then, and even if those guys were mistaken to be concerned about his inclusion in the Fanverse, the actions that those guys took as part of the pair only ended up proving Kane and Phil right. Maybe it was a dick thing for those two to reach out to Scott and bring up embarrassing things Ultranite had done when he was a kid in an effort to get him kicked out of the Fanverse, but ultimately by saying the things that they said in the pair and sharing the things that they did, they became the very thing that Scott was being warned about. They became the very thing that concerned Kane and Phil, and they ended up suffering tremendously because of it. This brings us to the contents of the pair chat. To be clear, I did reach out to Ramanov immediately when the scandal broke, and I tried to get a statement from him in my video, but he never responded. Now that I've finally gotten their side of the story, I feel obligated to present their explanation for some of the more egregious things that were included in the pair transcripts. First off, there's the doxing of Scott Cawthon, his wife, and his children. I've been able to confirm from multiple sources that someone else unrelated to the pair had found them on Scott's family members' Facebook pages, and they had circulated them through the FNAF Fangame scene. They apparently showed up in a lot of chats, not just the pair. While it's obviously totally inappropriate and unacceptable to share personal photos like that, I think we can all agree that it's not the same thing as actually sifting through Scott's family members' Facebook pages and like digging that stuff up. There was some pretty offensive language. In all my talks with members of the pair, none have ever tried to justify that. I think the only thing to say is that these were 3 teenage boys having what they thought were private conversations. I think we would all be pretty embarrassed if private conversations we had with our friends as teenagers were to suddenly leak. It doesn't excuse the casual use of slurs or racism or objectifying women or anything like that. I don't defend any of that language. Ramanov and Ultranite were accused of creating multiple fake accounts in order to boost their games on GameJolt. When all of this came to light and the fake accounts were banned, several fan games shot up in the rankings, implying that they had been downvoted maliciously by Ramanov and co. I asked Ramanov about this, who admitted to creating false accounts to boost his own games, as well as bury others. According to Ramanov, Juniors was often the recipient of similar attacks. He'd log in to find that the game had suddenly received 20 downvotes in the span of only a few minutes. According to Ramanov, this practice is an open secret in the FNAF fan game community, and there's lots of devs doing the same thing. This certainly doesn't make it right, but if it's true, it does make it a little more understandable. Finally, there are the leaks. The members of the pair have always asserted that they never actually intended to leak these games. At the time the controversy initially went down, I found this incredibly hard to believe, especially considering we have screenshots of them not just scheming to acquire leaks, but even talking about how they might go about doing it. They talk about how they'd have to leak their own games too in order to deflect suspicion, and it looks really premeditated. However, the members of the pair claim that this was just them fantasizing. They were upset at what they perceived as gatekeeping from some of the existing Fanverse developers, and in their private chat, they imagined leaking games to the world as a sort of revenge. This is a bit hard to believe at face value, but I'd like to point out that none of them have actually been accused of leaking anything in regards to the pair. I said at the end of my first pair video that we should expect a bunch of fangame leaks in the coming days or weeks because I fully believed that Ramanov or Meklis or Ultranite would decide, we're cancelled anyway, may as well take the nuclear option and just leak everything since we're getting blamed for doing so anyway. I expected everything to come out. I expected them to leak each other's games. However, that's not what happened. They never leaked anything. Ramanov and Meklis quietly continued work on their games. Juniors came out. Project Readjusted came out. At one point, some random person leaked the Pop Goes Evergreen office and tried to blame it on the pair, but it didn't work. In fact, as far as I know, the servers they had containing all the leaks have since been deleted. Ramanov and Meklis claim that the pair wasn't actually an evil leak collection server. They say it was just their community server for them and their fangame developer friends, and like all fangame developer discords, leaks made their way through. Anyone who's ever participated in servers full of fangame developers knows that people often work on lots of different projects, and they often share their work from each. According to Ramanov and the others, this is all the pair really was. And in light of the fact that none of these things ever actually leaked, even after these guys had nothing to lose, I don't think the members of the pair were evil or anything like that. I think they obviously made some really foolish decisions, and they handled some confrontation and bad blood between themselves and Fanverse developers really poorly. Still, I don't believe that they were really this shadowy organization devoted to sabotaging fangame projects. I think they were a bunch of kids who dreamed of being included in the Fanverse and who got too competitive and took things way too far. I think at times they fantasized about screwing over the people that they perceived as having screwed them over, but I don't think they ever actually intended to do some of the more horrific things that they've been accused of plotting. You may not agree. If I hadn't gotten to know Ramanov personally, I probably wouldn't either. Furthermore, a lot of people were really hurt by the threat that these people they had trusted were threatening to leak their games in private. I sympathize with that. I didn't have any of my own work threatened by the members of the pair, so it's not my place to say how those people should feel. However, in the wake of the pair's poor decisions, there were serious consequences. Ultranite and Ramanov both lost their chances at being admitted into the Fanverse. Furthermore, Ramanov had to watch his game Juniors be released and go on to become perhaps the biggest, most successful FNAF fan game ever. It's been downloaded off GameJolt over 500,000 times, and it's received coverage from some of the biggest creators in the world, and Ramanov was never really able to enjoy his game's success.
Oh no, it's sad.
Ramanov once told me that he always dreamed about Markiplier one day playing one of his games, and with Juniors, that finally happened.
Oh God!
However, when it did, he told me he couldn't really get that excited about it. I'm sure a part of him was delighted to see Mark playing his game, but I think a part of him felt ashamed that he had let so many people down with that same game. I know some people will never be able to forgive Ramanov or the other members of the pair for the things that they said. However, these guys didn't get away with this. Their actions had very real consequences, and I think we as a community maybe should lay off a bit. What those guys did was wrong, but I don't think they're necessarily the villains that we made them out to be when the scandal first broke. Considering I'm the one who made a video drawing lots of attention to this in the first place, I felt obligated to clarify that not everything was quite so black and white as things seemed back then. The pair guys felt like Kane and Fiznom misrepresented them to Scott, and it's understandable that that upset them. However, they let that upset them so much, they became the very things that they insisted they weren't. In the long run, their actions only proved Kane and Phil's concerns right. If Ramanov and Meklis and Ultranite had just ignored all the provocations and quietly worked on their games, they would probably be developing Fanverse titles right now, some of them at least. Ultranite and his team would probably still be working on Chompers. Now though, that'll never happen. Instead, Kane and Phil can effectively say, "Yeah, I told you so" to Scott, and they're right. The pair only have themselves to blame for that. Obviously, I was really nervous about making this video. It brings back old drama, and it forces me to play devil's advocate for people who are really not popular in the community. That said, as I mentioned before, I've come to learn a lot more context to this situation, and while I don't think it excuses the pair's behavior, it explains it in a way other than these guys are just total assholes. They certainly did some asshole things, but as I said before, things aren't always so black and white. Even if you're someone who could never forgive Ramanov and the other members of the pair for what they did, at least empathize with the fact that they suffered consequences for their actions.
He's like, alright, yeah, you just can't do it right now, you're too young. And so I would be making the game literally right now if that went through, because I just turned 18.
They didn't get away with anything. They lost an opportunity that they had dreamed about since they were little kids, and that sucks. That's a huge deal. In light of that, maybe leave those guys alone for now.
And that basically wraps up my little presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I just want to thank you for everything you've done, for even considering me. Creating and sending this video to you, it's been a total blast, and I hope I get to work with you very soon.